If you're running a small business with less than 50 employees, chances are HR isn't your only job. HR just turns out to be this collection of tasks that shows up in your day, oftentimes when you least expect it. And it's getting handled between all of your other tasks, or sometimes even after hours, or when something just goes wrong and suddenly the curtains are on fire. And the problem isn't that you don't care about HR. It's simply because you're likely not a trained HR expert and that no one's ever showed you how to make it fit into your real workday. And that's just the reality of a small business, especially with less than 50 employees. And I think it's really important to this conversation just to acknowledge that because even as an HR consultant and advisor, I don't think a full-time in-house HR person is always needed when you're less than that 50 employee mark. So what's important is that we figure out how to make HR processes work so that you can better manage them in your day alongside your other job. Because like I said, someone is usually managing HR alongside of all their other things. It's usually the owner, maybe an office manager or an admin or someone in finance. HR isn't their main responsibility. It's something that they're squeezing in wherever they can. And there's nothing wrong with that, but without clear processes, HR becomes reactive by default. A question comes in, you answer it. An issue pops up, you deal with it. And before you know it, everything feels urgent, even the things that really aren't. It's not because you're bad at HR. It's simply because without structure, there's no way to prioritize the work. You end up running around like a fire extinguisher with legs, and I don't want that for you. So when there is no clear HR processes in place, things start to get scattered. Time off requests might be coming in by text or email, or someone stops you in the hallway, and you may just even be stopped in the parking lot as you come into your office. The other thing to think about is employee information and where that lives. It oftentimes lives in multiple places, sometimes in spreadsheets, sometimes in payroll, maybe it's in a folder or on your computer, or maybe even a notebook. There's managers asking you questions in different ways at different times with no consistency and no documentation. So you respond in the moment. You do your best, but it takes more time than it should, and nothing ever feels finished. So I want to reframe what a process could really look like. And here's what I want you to hear. HR processes are not about control. They're not about bureaucracy. They're simply about deciding once how something gets handled, so you don't have to rethink it every single time. A good process answers basic questions, like where does the information come in from? Who handles it? And what happens next? And that's it. When those answers are clear, HR stops living in the margins of your day and starts fitting into it. Now, there's a simple rule of thumb that I like to follow, and this is where people usually get stuck. They hear processes and start to think everything has to be mapped and documented and locked down, but it doesn't. Here's the easiest way to decide what needs a process. If something happens often, involves more than one person, or creates risk if it's not handled consistently, it requires a process. If it doesn't, it probably doesn't need one. So let's talk about what actually needs a process. Number one is how information comes in. Things like time off requests, schedule changes, pay questions, employee updates. If information is coming at you from all directions, or you're constantly getting hit up with that, hey, I have a real quick question for you, that's a problem. Not because people are doing anything wrong, but because you can't manage that when it's so scattered. One clear way for employees and managers to submit requests saves you hours of back and forth time. Now, the second thing that needs a process is where employee information lives. If you have spreadsheets and a payroll system, or maybe a folder on your computer and stuff jammed in notebooks somewhere, you're not alone. This is how everybody starts out. But that setup really kind of guarantees confusion down the road. Now, here's what I want to make clear. You don't need a fancy, expensive, elaborate system. You just need one place you can trust, We're going to cover more on managing employee data securely in another video in this series. But for now, let's just get your arms around where all that employee data is today and how you might consolidate it into one or two places that works for your business. Now, the third place to consider putting processes around are decisions that you make more than once. How time off is requested and approved, what happens when someone is late, how pay changes are handled, and where employees go when there's questions about payroll, what managers should do when there's people issues. If you're answering the same questions repeatedly, that's a signal. A simple process here means you can stop that redeciding every time something comes along. And the last place to look for processes is anything that touches compliance. These things have to be handled very consistently. Things like pay, classifications, and anything compliance related. Now, that doesn't mean more complexity. It just means more consistency. These are the areas where small mistakes turn into big headaches later. So clear processes here protect you just as much as they support your employees. So let's talk just for a minute about what doesn't need a formal process, because not everything deserves structure. There's the one-off situations. If something happens once in a while, once a year, every now and then, don't overthink it. Handle it thoughtfully, get support if you need it, but don't feel like you need to create an elaborate process around it. There's also some human conversations that happen in business. Maybe some really light coaching conversations, just some check-ins with folks, or some real-time problem solving. These things don't necessarily need scripts or fancy workflows. They just need some clarity and some follow-through. So don't feel like every single thing that touches HR actually needs a formal process. Now, another place that you may be tempted to put processes in place for that maybe just aren't needed are places where things aren't actually broken. Sometimes we try to build processes around things that are already working pretty well. And that's how HR gets complicated and heavy really quick. So try not to dive into fixing things that just aren't broken. It's kind of the golden rule, right? If it's working, leave it alone. All right, to wrap this whole video up, the point I want to make is that clear, consistent HR processes aren't about controlling people. It's about reducing friction. Clear processes are going to give you fewer interruptions, clearer priorities, and better decisions faster. And most importantly, they give HR a place in your day rather than kind of roaming around on the margins. And remember, you don't need to overhaul everything. Start with a few repeat issues. Decide how they're going to be handled, document it, communicate it, and then let that structure do the work. All right, so that's what I have for clear processes. In the next video, we're going to talk about basic HR policies, the ones that actually support those processes and get used, and the ones that just end up collecting dust. So get ready, and I will see you in the next video.